You got a name tag. How are you? I know, but good, how are you?
I was at city council in Skirvin for 4 years, and the only time anybody ever came as if it was a rock concert.
I show about 10 seconds of. It's not quite a rocket launch, but. Good evening. My name is John Nicholas. I'm the president of the Estes Park Economic Development Corporation. I want to thank everyone who's come out here tonight and thank our panel members. This evening's event is really about having a workforce housing forum. We've brought together a number of people who have a variety of experiences and expertise to bring to this subject. We really want to cover both the problem and some of the solutions for workforce housing. We are first going to hear from Rita Correlja with the Estes Park Housing Authority. She will talk about the housing needs assessment, which was completed last year. Then we're going to have a panel on employers and workforce housing. We have with us Randy Brigham of the Estes Park Medical Center, to my far right, your far left. Then we have Scott Pope of the YMCA of the Rockies, Anthony D'Souza of Antonio's Pizza, and Diane Muno of the Spruce House, who owns several retail locations and also is the chair of the Estes Park EDC Workforce Housing Committee. We're then going to hear from Randy Hunt, who's the Town of Estes Park Community Development Director, about his proposed approach, which the town board has now asked him to implement in terms of code changes that may help address some of these issues. And then we're going to have a second panel on perspectives on code barriers to workforce housing. We have Greg Rosner here, who is with Skyrun, who's one of our Estes Park EDC board members and chair of our Commercial Development Code Committee. We also have Steve Lane of our Commercial Development Code Committee of Basis Architecture. And we have Seth Hansen of the Group Inc., who works not only as a realtor, but also has worked in the development field, and his family has had a longstanding involvement in development here in Estes Park. I also want to welcome Adam Shake, our Director of Communications, and to thank him for putting things together. Partners for Commerce has served as a co-chair for this, so I want to thank Kirby Hazelton in the audience, and we have some other EVPC board members. I see Kent Smith here, who's also on the Estes Park EDC board, so there's a little overlap there. Also want to thank the Board of Realtors and the Estes Area Lodging Association for publicizing this to their members, as well as our local papers who continue to publicize these events. If you are in the audience, and I know we were contacted by a number of people who wanted to make sure that they could hear this on the internet. If you would like to submit a question, please email us at info@estesparkedc.com. I'm hopeful that we'll have at least 20 or 25 minutes for questions at the end, and I hope that each panel will also have a chance to give a succinct introduction to their viewpoints and then have a couple questions during the panels. So with that, I will turn it over to Rita Correlja.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's always great to see such a good turnout when people care about housing and how much it means to our community. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview and maybe hit on a couple of important points of the housing needs assessment that was done in 2016. It's a large document, and John has given me 7 minutes to speak about it. So I will be just hitting on the key points. And then we'll have a few minutes after this for questions. Okay, don't do this to me.
Try the arrow keys, I think that.
That's what I'm hitting. Seriously?
I think Adam's going to help you out.
Oh, there we go. I got it. Bingo. Sorry. So as I went through the study, I tried to pull out a couple of key points, and I think this one is good. Development of housing for the workforce within the Estes Park area is essential for providing the labor force needed to fill vacant positions, staff plan development, and support the resident and economic diversity and sustainability desired. The Economic Development Council has done a great job of encouraging new businesses and encouraging the growth of businesses, and we strive constantly to make this a more year-round community with better jobs and some better paying jobs. And yet, without housing, when these folks come to town or they look at their options, without housing, they're not going to choose Estes Park. It's just the bottom line. They're going to choose a community where they can find both a job and housing. So of all the numbers and statistics that are in this study, I thought I'd show you this slide. So this sort of tells us what the needs and gaps are. And they quantify it by catch-up and keep-up. So catch-up is obviously to what we need to build to just to keep up with where we are right now, to catch up with the pent-up demand. And that came to 670 units. Keep-up would be from retiring employees and new jobs that we hope to create. And that puts it the total of housing units needed by the year 2020 or through 2020 somewhere between 1,480 and 1,690 units. It's a lot of units. Now, I will just point out that this is all units. This is everything from one-bedroom apartments to efficiency apartments up to large, beautiful homes. I mean, it really is the whole gamut of it. It's still a staggering number, though. And one of the things, we've done these studies. The studies are usually good for somewhere between 8 and 10 years. And we have done them every 8 or 10 years. I think the first one was done in 1989. And the projections every year give everybody a reason to pause. Every time one of these studies come out, people go, ooh, there's no way we're going to do that. And yet every year more units are built, but never, I don't believe, has it ever gone to where they've built what they've projected we needed. Therefore, every year we fall a little further behind and a little further behind. A couple of other things from the study. Construction has not kept pace with demand, particularly for rental units. Rentals are in tight supply and high demand. In my office, we call this no duh. Rentals support businesses in need of workers and help new residents get a foothold in the community. And commuting is not a solution. The rental units, of all of those units that I mentioned just previously, 1,040 are suggested that they be rental units. On commuting, I just want to mention one thing, and a lot of businesses have people who commute. I know the hospital does, the school does. And really what happens with commuting, and this has been studied nationally as well as regionally, is that a worker, if they commute an hour or more each way, a worker will last about a year. That's about how, there are exceptions to that, we understand that, but typically that's about how long you could expect that to happen, to last. So the consultants from the study gave us 11 implementation strategies. They all have a place in solving this problem. And I will just briefly go through some of these. They felt that the town needed a strategic housing plan, that they needed to hire a housing coordinator, housing requirements on new development, accessory dwelling units, a workforce housing fund, town code amendments, town-owned land, downtown housing and density, employer-assisted housing efforts, apartment development and redevelopment, and workforce housing guidelines. As I went through this study over the last couple of days preparing for this, and I've been through it many times, it really stood out to me today that without town code amendments, without changing the code, none of this is going to work. There are too many barriers within the code to make this even, to make it a viable product for a private developer to come in and want to build here. It just is. The density, downtown density, we're looking at the downtown plan now. I will say that changes have been made recently to the density, and if there's a workforce component or an income component, they have made changes to the density. When we first started trying to get this through, we heard things like, it won't make a difference. The housing authority is the only one who will utilize this density bonus. I have to tell you that since this has been through, I can't tell you how many phone calls I've received from private developers who are now interested or would take an interest in doing so because of that. I also want to mention at this point the housing authority's wait list, because that's sort of a telling component to what the demand is. And I had reason for another project to take a look at our wait list that need a little bit of cleaning up. But I will tell you, for 2-bedroom units, there are currently 594 people on our wait list. When we built Falcon Ridge, we built 48 units. We had 250 applications just for that project. And John is here, so I have to go fast. Okay. And on the solution side, the study states that Estes Park needs a comprehensive array of strategies to effectively address existing needs and create housing for the workforce as the community grows and diversifies. There is no silver bullet. And the reason I even put that up there is because this situation isn't going to change by any one thing. It's going to be a lot of small little pieces that will eventually make a difference. And this large study, if anybody has the desire, is on our website, and you can find it there.
So I thought what I would do is invite people in the audience if they have any questions. And I take it I'm coming over the microphone? Yes, no? Does anyone have any questions for Rita about the housing needs assessment or the strategy? If you could just state your first name.
My name is Kate. I had a question about the density changes you mentioned.
Yes.
Can you say a little bit more? I never heard about that.
So there was a density bonus in the code. There was an existing density bonus. It was limited to income that reached for rentals that reached 60% of the AMI or less, 80% if it was a home ownership. And if you complied with that, you could get a 50% additional density. So instead of 8 units per acre, you were going to get 12 per acre. We did eventually, they changed the code to bring those income limits up to 150%, which is really awesome, and they doubled the density. Just very recently, first of the year, yep. Mr. Hunt.
Information is available probably on the town website.
Yes, if it's not in the updated municipal code on the website that has a lag time of a few months, please come by community development or call us or email us, and we'll make sure you get the text on that.
Question from Jerry.
You mentioned the wide range of kinds of housing needed, and certainly we've got issues with service workers and professionals. It's two
Absolutely.
very different sets
They
of
are.
needs. This is specifically a question regarding the immigrant community in Estes Park, and I'm assuming in general, potentially a community that could access or would want access to housing authority housing. And my question is, for undocumented immigrants, what are the issues in terms of housing authority housing, and are we taking that into account in our solutions?
That's a good question. Within the housing authority's properties, it varies property by property, and most of that has to do with where our funding comes from. So, most recently is Falcon Ridge, and we received a $1.8 million zero-interest loan from the State Division of Housing. Because of that, they require that every household member have lawful presence in the United States. The other properties, the other properties require that the head of household, and that was a board decision as well as funding. So it varies, but it is, you're right, it is an obstacle for them, absolutely. And that's a good point.
Rita, I want to thank you for that great summary of the housing needs assessment. Rita will be obviously available along with everyone for questions at the end. I just wanted to give people the big picture as we move through this, and very much appreciate it.
Absolutely, thank you.
Our first panel is a group of employers in our community, and we basically wanted to get a mix of employers. I'm going to start with Randy and work our way across. If you can just briefly state your affiliation and what brought you here tonight. And really the question is, how have you or your organization observed workforce housing impacting you both as a community owner and as a business owner or major employer?
Good evening. This will be brief because I've been here a whole 30 days. So I'll give you a quick overview of kind of how it affects the hospital. And then when we're able to answer questions, I'll do the best I can, but I may not be able to answer real specifics yet because of my newness to this position. But as you know, Estes Park Medical Center provides a wide variety of healthcare services to the entire valley and surrounding areas, including clinical, with our clinics. We have acute care, we have emergency services, and then we also have the nursing home. So all of those are employees in Estes Park Medical Center. We employ about 340 employees. Currently we have 31 openings. So when you look at those openings and the difficulty in recruiting those, first you have to look at the fact that healthcare in general is a difficult industry to recruit for right now because of just the aging workforce and the increased needs for healthcare. For example, in 2008, we collectively in the United States, we had about 1 million registered nurses that were from the baby boom generation. That's about half now, and they're retiring at the rate of 70,000 per per year. So that impacts healthcare all across the country. Then when you have workforce housing shortages, that just adds a whole nother dynamic to it. We currently have 71% of our workforce that lives in the Estes Park area. And when I pulled that statistic together, I included the actual town of Estes Park, Drake, Glen Haven, Pinewood Springs. So a relatively close area, but not just the city limits of Estes Park. 71%. That means 29% of our employees commute. And they commute from places like Fort Collins, Greeley, Loveland, Longmont, and certainly this time of year, because of the closure of Highway 34, the people that are commuting from someplace like Fort Collins and Greeley are impacted even more. But even a commute of 35, 40 minutes, to Rita's point earlier, that starts to wear on people. And you look at that and you think, well, you know, it's an hour and a half and it's not a bad drive. That's an extra hour and a half out of everybody's day away from their family and so on. So it has a huge impact on our recruiting efforts all the time. So it is a real problem for Estes Park Medical Center. It's a problem for the community itself, because it will eventually, we try as hard as we possibly can to make sure those positions are filled all the time. But at some point in time, if you've got a huge vacancy rate, it can't help but start to impact services as well. And those are services that all of us need at one point or another, and we certainly don't want to have any of those things negatively impact the service that we provide from the medical center.
Thank you very much, Randy. Scott, if you could speak to the YMCA. Obviously, you're one of our largest employers, and you have both year-round and seasonal needs.
Yes, we have about 700 employees in the peak of the summer. 550 of those are seasonal employees. We house all our seasonals on our property. But we also have 150 year-round employees. About similar to the hospital, a fourth of them commute, and 3/4 live in the Estes Valley. And we, like a lot of employers, I think, in town, are seeing more and more, when a position opens up, we'll get a number of qualified applicants who really would love to live in the Estes Valley and don't mind the pay until they find out how much housing costs. And we'll often see half of them drop out just because of the housing issue. And part of my job at the Y is to make sure that we're financially sustainable for the long term. And I think that's what the Estes Park community needs to be looking at in this workforce housing problem, is what it's going to take for us to be financially sustainable. I think a big part of that is going to be having a workforce that has attainable housing. And the Y has probably the exact same problems as other employers in town. And we'd like to be part of that solution, part of a community-wide effort, and to do our part. At the Y, our business is really built on long-term relationships. So it's not only just attracting the employees, but retaining employees for the long term that we're concerned about. Because you can't really build long-term relationships if your workforce is turning over constantly. So we'd like to think that our employees who live in the community for decades are strong community members, and hopefully we can solve this issue so that we can continue to be part of the local community.
Thank you, Scott. Tony, if you could address it from the standpoint of a private business owner, and tell us a little bit about how long you've been open. You're relatively new to the community, but you're pretty well established already.
So I arrived in Estes Park back in 2010. And no, it wasn't 2010, my apologies. I moved in 2006. In 2012, I opened Summit View Coffee. Biggest problem I had, employees. Great product, plenty of people loved it. Employees were the hard part. No one would commute for the going wage, and that was the big problem. And people would complain. The community as a whole is all awake at jibber jabber complaining that They're never open. Well, find the people, and I'll stay open 24 hours a day. That was the biggest problem that we had. When I opened Antonio's Pizza, it took off immediately because there was a big void in the community for quality pizza. That was something that was needed. I took all my employees from there and brought them over to Antonio's and closed Summitview. I owned the property, so it was no big deal. It was a business decision that had to be made. Would I have loved to run them both? Absolutely, but I couldn't. We had people who really gave it a try in the commute, and I'd come into a letter on the table, and it would say, thank you for the opportunity, but I can't commute an hour and a half each day. Understood. What I've seen in these years is that the visitation to the park has only increased, and it's increased probably 100%, maybe more, since I first got here. That means 100% more work has to be done with no additional housing. The housing list that she was talking about earlier, I forgot your name, I apologize. You're talking about 6 times the number of applicants for the number of rooms. That's a big problem. And that's before we get to workforce housing. Now, we all swell to some bigger number during the summer, and thank God for international workers. But we have a clear and present danger approaching, and I don't know if all of you have really taken this in, but the State Department has made some decisions that are going to make it very hard for anyone with a visa to get in. Without these J1 students, half of us are dead. We don't have the rooms of the Y. None of us can put up 300 people. So unless you want to see the service levels decrease, the community needs to get behind this housing initiative and help us. Because the small business owner, everybody says, oh yeah, it would be great to be you, and I love your product. Yeah, come on down. I'll be glad to stand next to any of you for a full day and show you how it works. When the demand exceeds the available workforce. I looked at the tax numbers for the first 3 months of the year. We're up 26%. That's 26% more work, right? Any argument on that number? Where do we get 26% more people with 0 houses? The inventory currently in the real estate market is very low. So there's nothing. You want to buy a house, pay top dollar. You want a good house, you'll have to wait. Now, I see opportunity right behind us, and that is the Elkhorn Lodge. I know nothing about the logistics of getting it done. I see 67 acres for 10 million. How many houses can you build there? Quite a few. And I know, again, I know nothing about the logistics. But the way this is affecting us is it's forcing all of us to do more work with less people. The stress on our people is such that you'll see us routinely close on a Tuesday, out of the blue. Why did they close? Because everybody's exhausted. We're all doing our best. So there's going to have to be support from the community. And again, I don't know any of the key statistics or what needs to change in the community development guide. But something has to be done if you guys want to eat. Because otherwise you'll be going to Safeway and making your own food. So with that, I'd like to turn it over. I don't have any additional points other than the fact that this is Rocky Mountain National Park. The reason we're all here, 95% of us has to do with that park. It is a 5-star attraction. We need to provide 5-star accommodations, 5-star restaurants, and everything in between. If we don't do that, we won't have the return visitors. And all of these visa problems we're about to see mean that the international visitors will be coming at a lower rate. What do we do then? So no workers and no international visitors. We're left with us. Who's coming to work? Thank you all.
Thank you, Tony. Last, we have Diane Muno of the Spruce House, who's also the chair of our Workforce Housing Committee.
Thank you, John, and thanks to this panel for being here tonight, and to this audience. We really appreciate the fact that there's a level of interest, and we're excited to hear the kinds of questions and comments that you have. But I'll tell you, I didn't come to become chair of the Workforce Housing Committee as a burning desire. I know nothing about housing, and I know a little about workforce, but what I do know is I'm not the only employer who's in the situation of trying to figure out how to survive and make a living to be able to live here. And I work just like everybody else who comes into my shop every day and punches the time clock, so be it. But what I did find, the reason I wanted to get on this committee and ended up chairing it was because it's not just our large employers who are trying to make decisions. We need the small employers to also be part of that conversation and part of the way the solutions come to fruition, so that it doesn't become a corporate solution, it becomes a community solution, because we're all the ones who are trying to live, work, and play here. And all of the people that we hire, they also want to earn a living here. They're not asking to get top dollar, but they do make dollars that are higher than what the Housing Authority's guidelines will allow them to get on that list of 594 to try to find a size of a unit that'll accommodate their family. So it said, well, the workforce needs to be part of the solution, and I agree. But we need a community that understands what that issue really is, what that problem truly is, and help us work towards those decisions that will affect all of us. So the workforce that we're talking about, they're people who contribute every day in this community. They're the ones who are taking their kids to school, who are doing the after-curricular activities, who are investing in being on the boards and serving in this community. They're people who care and they want to raise a family here. And as an individual, I've talked about being an owner, but being a family member, I have a daughter and son-in-law with a child and another on the way, and they can't afford housing here, but they contribute to my workforce. I can't afford to pay them enough to buy a house, but I've got an extra bedroom they can live in. So that's what we do. We do multi-generational families. It's not the first time it's happened in the history of our United States, and it won't be the last. But we certainly should be able and can be able to offer more opportunities to these people who really contribute. Thank you for hearing this.
I want to thank all of our panel members. If you have any questions for our employer panel members.
They get it.
I think they get it. So I think the lesson to take away from that is we've pretty well defined the problem. I think the housing needs assessment clearly gave us a definition of the wide scope of the problem, but you've seen some examples of how different employers are looking at this issue. The next presentation we wanted to have was from our Community Development Director, Randy Hunt. Randy came here last summer, and last week he had a discussion with the town board about the overall subject of how the development code relates to this issue. And we also have the Planning Commission tomorrow at 1:30 is on the agenda to discuss height limit changes for multifamily residential zoning only. And I'll let Randy cover those two topics. I would add that from the perspective of Estes Park EDC, we were involved with Avalanche Consulting in doing a regional economic strategy, and with 35 or 40 different items on the list, there were 3 items that were identified as core issues that must be addressed. One was workforce housing, another was development code issues as it relates to workforce housing, as well as commercial redevelopment, and the third big issue was implementing broadband. So with that, I'll turn it over to Randy, and appreciate you being here.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everybody. Glad to be here myself. What I'd like to do first is say a few words generally about our development code changes that we've got as of last Tuesday, as John mentioned, underway, and outline how a few particular things fit into that, and then see if you all have any questions and give you some details about the timeline. First of all, the development code from Estes, let me back up. Estes Valley Development Code is the correct name. That name, as the term implies, means that our development code covers the town of Estes Park, but also parts of unincorporated Larimer County. It's the entire valley that we're in, basically. I have a map upstairs if anybody's curious about those boundaries. But it's essentially the settled area between where our highways go down into the valley on the east, the national park on the west and north, and other federal land on the south. The development code is 17 years old. It was created as a unified item in year 2000 with some years of development leading up to that. What leads me to the topic tonight is that, as John mentioned, I've been here about 10 months now. One of the charges I got when I came in was pay close attention to the Estes Valley Development Code. It does not seem to be serving us as well as it might. So I've had plenty of occasion in the past 10 months to work with the code, and I would agree with that assessment. It is not serving the valley as it should or as it could. Part of the issue is our process and our substance as it relates to housing, new housing, and very importantly, redevelopment of existing property and existing housing stock. So there's a whole long list, 9 pages worth of suggestions that I made and which our town board accepted last Tuesday that is still online. It's right now put up under the town board agenda packet from last Tuesday, and that will only be online till Thursday or Friday of this week. We'll replace it with the upcoming packet, but that'll be put online. That memo that town board approved will be put online as a more permanent outline of what we're proposing to do. And there are a lot of things that have to do with housing. I'll, in the interest of time, not go through those with you, but please read that memo, and I'd be glad to hear from you on any ideas or thoughts you have. To the specific issue of building height, that is only one piece in a bigger jigsaw puzzle, and we've heard quite a bit about the bigger puzzle tonight, but building height is an important component. What we've got is one piece of that up for discussion this week and going forward into the early summer. Building height right now for all buildings in all zoning districts in Estes Valley is 30 feet. There is a formula, a very complicated formula, that allows in certain cases on sloping land for buildings to have their highest point higher than 30 feet from a low point on a sloped property. But it's got a very fancy algebraic formula. I had to spend a good month on it before I could figure it out, and I couldn't repeat it to you from memory. I've got it in the book, and that's the only way I know. So we're proposing to simplify how that height is calculated. And along with that, we have an amendment moving forward or moving into the realm of public comment to deal with multi-unit buildings, which our code defines as 3 or more units in a single building, so apartments, condos, things like that, to increase that height from 30 feet. In the current formulation, we've got it increased to 38 feet. So what that would do, and along with some other measurement changes, would allow 3 full stories for a multi-unit building, plus some room for variation in roof line. Right now, we have a very rigid formula that sets that height at 30 with a few fancy exceptions in that formula, and measures to the tip of the highest point on the roof. We've got some changes that allow an averaging of the roof line, and this is primarily to allow for some variety. You may have noticed that in town, especially downtown, which is not multi-unit zoning, but as a good example, we have a lot of flat roof buildings. I'm not sure a community that's all flat roof buildings. I think Nassau is like that, but we're not Nassau, so perhaps we can allow a little more variety. One of the things you'll see on the Planning Commission agenda tomorrow is a simple change in how we calculate it from that complicated formula. If you imagine the peak of a roof with the tip up here, gabled roof, the eave line down here, what we take is an average of the two, simple average, halfway between. And that is a horizontal plane that's the top of the height measurement. At the bottom of the land where the foundation goes, We simplify that formula a great deal and say, take your highest point along the foundation, take your lowest point, average those two. You get a horizontal plane. And then you connect the two horizontal planes with a vertical line. Very simple. I could do that, and I'm not a math whiz, believe me. What we're aiming at is a simple way that not only developers, but our community, our citizens, will know what could happen down the street in terms of building height, what could happen next door, what could happen across the valley. Along with that, we have a parallel amendment that will allow for that 38 feet for 3 or more units in a building in the RM multifamily zoning district. We have begun a conversation about changing heights in other zoning districts. Downtown is one that's been mentioned. We have a downtown plan underway, and so the reason the downtown height isn't on front burner of discussion is the downtown plan steering committee is going to be having a look at that. But that plan should be in place toward the end of this year, early next year at the latest, so we'll have some additional discussion. There's a third element, probably the most minor of the 3 elements, that's also on the Planning Commission agenda tomorrow, and that has to do with the ability to incorporate some basic design features into multi-unit buildings. This element arose out of Planning Commission discussion on ways to buffer, if you have a higher building and you can, for example, step back the 3rd story so it's not just a vertical cube, but kind of a tapered element, tapered in a vertical way, then it might buffer the effect of visuals from other vantage points here and there. So all of those are on the Planning Commission agenda for tomorrow. Why is it important to talk about building height? Why is that important? This is a simple way to put it, and I should add that simplicity is not only something I live by because I can't live complicated, but it's also a hallmark that we want for our development code. We want people to be able to pick up the code, read in plain English what's expected, either of them as developers or of us as citizens, and know what they're getting. I'd like to simplify the whole thing. That's going to be a long process, but I think we'll get there. So in terms of building height and the way we think of height as it relates to housing, simple proposition. We've got 3 choices in Estes Valley as I would see them. One is, as far as housing, one is to spread out, build more units horizontally. Another is to go up, add a little vertically. The third choice is to do neither and watch our housing posture deteriorate further. The housing needs assessment, the avalanche report, testimony we've heard tonight doesn't seem to indicate that's a positive option. I won't say that going up is an unalloyed good. I spent many years in Florida, and if there's dangers in trying to make Florida and Colorado sound alike. They're not a whole lot alike. But one thing we have in common is that we got a lot of visitors who like to come here and appreciate the views. Florida has that too in the beachside communities. So you go to somewhere like Sanibel Island or New Smyrna Beach where I used to live, and people who drive down A1A highway and want that view of the ocean appreciate the fact that they don't have horizontal sprawl development to block their view. In many Florida communities, they took a conscious decision to go a little more vertical. Partly there's a market aspect. Obviously, if you're on the top floor, you have a nice view. But more importantly, I think for the community as a whole, there's a way to not interrupt the views of the ocean. And unlike the Rocky Mountains, there's only one line for the ocean. You don't get to put peaks and valleys on it unless it's a tidal wave. That's another story. So the choice, I think, to go up is a practical choice. If we take as a proposition, which I think has been well established by our studies, that we need more housing and we need a way to provide it, then I think vertical becomes a logical choice for that. John, a few words about our process, if I may. The Planning Commission has a public hearing tomorrow in this room at 1:30. There are several other items on the agenda, but housing building height is fairly early on the agenda after a couple of specific projects. So shortly after 1:30, we'll have a public hearing on that. Planning Commission also has study sessions before each of their meetings. They will have one in this room also, beginning at 10:30 tomorrow, and this topic is also on that agenda. Planning Commission's a recommending body. All of our development code amendments go to both town board and to the county board of commissioners, usually in that order. And tomorrow, if the Planning Commission chooses to move it forward as either recommended favorably, recommended unfavorably, or some other fashion, if it moves forward, it will go on most likely in June to our town board and then proceed onward later in the month or early July to the county board of commissioners. So please come if you can. If you can't come, or even if you can come, the agenda items are also online on the town's website, staff report, the actual text of the amendment, and a few other things. If you look under Planning Commission, boards and commissions, you'll find all that material.
Let's see if we can have one or two questions for Randy at this point, and then we'll do our final panel, and we'll have open questions. If you happen to be watching on TV and you have any questions to pose, now would be a good time to compose something and send it to info@estesparkedc.com.
Hi, this is Kate again. As you said, our development code is 17 years old. Pretty out of touch. What happened to all the work that went into changing that in around 2012? Can you explain to us how it came to be that that was not adopted?
Ma'am, I can't explain it to you. I wasn't here and I don't know the full story. I wish I could give you more information, but I simply don't know. Right, I came here in 2016. I can tell you the files in our office are not very complete on that issue. And in candidness, we also have had a lot of staff turnover since that time.
Somebody needs to speak to that at some point.
I'd be glad to know as well.
So I'm looking at Frank Lancaster, who came here, almost halfway into the year of 2012. So none of us really have good contacts for that. But I think historically, we've had a number of code proposals that seem to be deliberated over for 12 or 18 months and then ultimately turned down. So I don't know if you could address that aspect of it, because that would be a more general way of kind of addressing Kate's question.
I can speak to the general proposition of how code amendments are handled, again, not knowing the specifics of our history. But I am aware that we had something of a lengthy history since 2000 of code amendments taking an extraordinarily long time, and I mean that literally, extraordinary. Most code amendments in most places I've worked in a number of places over my 30 years in this career, and most code amendments take 1.5 to maybe 2.5 months to reach conclusion. And there's a definite conclusion to code amendments. They're voted up, they're voted down, occasionally they're withdrawn, but they have a disposition. We do have a history in Estes Valley Development Code of amendments that just seem to wither away. Frankly, I think that's the absolute wrong way to run any kind of railroad. You need a firm, dispositive, definite end to things, or the community is left with no resolution. I don't think that's fair. I hope that helps.
Maybe one more question, and then we'll do our final panel. A question from Paul.
At present, the plan is, or the amendments in the multifamily housing districts is 12 units per acre, correct?
That's with the density bonus in our,
16.
Okay, in the down.
I'm sorry, yeah, it's 16 units per acre with the amendment.
Yeah, and in my mind, that doesn't get you very far, particularly with most of the multifamily zoning with new housing units, relatively new housing there's only a few spots in the community where there would be redevelopment. My question is, has there been given any consideration under the downtown master plan to allowing housing density that would be much higher than 12 units per acre?
Yes, that discussion's been approached. It's going into the active phase in June and July. So our downtown plan steering committee meets every month. If you can't come, Paul, or if anyone isn't able to come, we'll be glad to provide a summary. But they meet every second Wednesday of every month, and that's 8:30 a.m. in the upstairs rooms, 201, 202, 203. The short answer on density I'd add is that density is one of the key pieces. Density does not mean density in the Estes Valley Development Code. If you hear 8 units per acre, 16 units per acre, that's not accurate as far as the real measurement of it, because we define density as net density. And there's a complicated formula behind that that I would run over my time if I tried to explain. But what we need to do is say what we mean what we say. If we want 8 units per acre, 6, 12, 16, 18, whatever number the community finds acceptable, that's the number we ought to have in the code, have everyone able to understand it, be on the same playing field.
Thank you very much, Randy. We'll have an opportunity for questions shortly, but I wanted to engage with our final panel, and I kind of put 3 questions on the agenda here. So obviously, we may not have time for everyone to answer every question, so you kind of get to choose what you want to answer. And what I was trying to get at was, based on what Randy's telling us, do you have anything that you would add in terms of perspective on code changes for workforce housing? Are there other things that haven't come up that you think we need to be looking at? And finally, really from an industry perspective, how do code changes relate to the ability of the private sector to actually do projects? And I think I'm going to start with Seth Hansen. Seth, your family, over the years, you've been involved in a lot of development. You have family members who've been involved. So you bring not just a realtor's perspective, but also a developer perspective.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Appreciate the invite. Let me introduce myself a little bit more. I've been here since '04. I started the first 5 years of my career primarily as a developer. When the recession hit, I changed to selling almost full time, and it's been recent years that I've jumped back into the development game. So 90% realtor, 10% developer, and I'm doing some projects on my own. So I can speak from 2 perspectives. In addition to, I've also been a commuter. I was a daily commuter, so I know what that commute's like. Now I do it several days a week. So I'm a property owner in Estes, but I actually live in Fort Collins. And I'm very active in selling in the Loveland, Fort Collins area where a lot of our employees used to live. And a stat that's staggering is back in 2008, the median price in Loveland for a single-family home was $217,000. Last year it was $345,000. So just to further emphasize the need here, it's no longer viable for people to live down there anymore and commute to Estes. What I'd like to share with you is my thoughts on what I think should be a good partnership between the private sector and public. Right now, I agree with some things that Randy has said. The code is very complicated. From a developer's perspective, when we look at a project, it's a formula. We're trying to figure out if a project is viable, and there's a ton of unknowns. It's not just development code. You're trying to project construction cost, development cost. With as many unknowns as there are, it'd be nice to try to reduce that and alleviate some of those so we can get into these developments and know that they're going to be viable projects. Because myself included and others, I've seen a ton of people, developers who had to hit the restart button when the recession hit. It's an extremely risky business, extremely risky. So how do we, improve that relationship? And then as it relates to workforce housing, again, it gets back to this formula. So I have all sorts of fixed costs that I can't do anything about. Land is what it costs. You know, you can negotiate off that a little bit when you purchase the land. Construction costs, non-negotiable. You find a builder who's going to work hard for you and try to keep costs down. But that's pretty much a fixed cost. Sewer fees, tap fees, fixed cost. So really, the only thing you can play with is density, okay? And that's one of my big things is trying to look at the code and see if we can look at some of the zonings. RM's one of them. I think we should be looking at A1 as far as increasing some densities, because if we're going to try to make things affordable here, I can't go to my contractor and say, you know what, go to the lumber supplier and tell him to reduce his costs. It doesn't work that way. The only thing I can truly play with is density. If I can get more units, then I can get my land costs down. And every unit helps. The increase, the density bonus that happened for the RM district was a game changer. And that's why Rita's phone has been ringing. Developers went from looking at RM zoning at 8 per unit, and now they can consider 16. You know, the additional 8 still has some strings attached to it, but the change to the median income and the requirements there was another game changer. It now makes it viable for a developer to consider looking at the additional 8 units. Because at the end of the day, you have a buyer. Previously, there were no buyers because of the restrictions placed upon that. So that was huge, and I think we're going to see that in action here pretty soon. The height, so I'm probably going too long, but some things that we're looking at right now. What's that?
Leave something for the rest of us.
Okay. I'll let you guys speak to the height limit. That's one of the pieces that's helping developers, in my opinion, make projects viable. And that's maybe where I can pass the baton to you guys.
Sure, thanks. So for those of you who don't know me, I've run an architecture practice here in the Valley for 18 or so years. And again, seen it through the cycle. I was actually here before the 2000 code got changed, so I have a little bit of that background and been participating throughout that time. And I do agree with Seth, you know, the density change and the AMI change is really a game changer. It's absolutely true. Because the only other thing you can have some effect on besides density is the sale price or rent that you charge, right? That's got some, to the degree that you have more units, that price can then fluctuate some. But in terms of the height, if you think about any given site, you've got your building and you've got your units and you've got your parking, right? You have to park your car and you have to walk to the building. So you've got parking areas, you've got sidewalks, and you've got buildings. And to Randy's point earlier, if you start laying out all of these buildings and they're only a story or two high, then that effectively spreads out over the entire property, and you get a property that's essentially covered in hard surface, in parking lot and building, and there's very little green space, which is, again, why we came here. We came here for the green space, right? So that also creates a lot of issues moving forward. We have drainage issues, and we start chasing that water all the way through town, and the Public Works starts, you know, losing their mind on what we do with this. It does create infrastructure issues. So one of the things that can be a significant aid in creating a better development, a nicer product, more green space, is being able to elevate to a third story. I think about it, that basically cuts the footprint down by a third, which it can be, I mean, that's tens of thousands of square feet, even on a relatively small project. So it can have a really big impact on what you see an individual project like, and then, you know, as they develop, what the valley looks like as a whole. So, and right now, our measurement, as Randy has pointed out, is just I've been dealing with it for 17 years or whatever. It's crazy. It's nuts. It needs to get fixed, and it needs to be something that's more intelligent. So I definitely applaud those steps.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Greg Rosner. I've been here a long time myself. Been involved in real estate development, and there's a couple points that I want to bring up to give you some two things. One is the density and the height. If you want to see a project that has 8 units an acre, all you have to do is go up to the hospital district, and that's exactly what you get. Those lots are exactly work out to 8 units an acre without the roads. So that's what a project looks like. So you say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, what's wrong with that, again, is the costs that it takes the costs that are involved in creating this particular housing. So you've got to diminish those costs, and the only way you can do it is to increase the density. So to increase that density, you either, as Randy and Steve said, you either go out or you go up. We don't have room to go out. We've got to go up to get the density. But one of the things that I want to address, which we've talked about the business people, we've talked about the developer, we've talked about all these different segments, but there's one group of people, and we've talked about people that need workforce housing, but with the other group of people, and I hear this all the time that you never talk about, are the retirement people that are here. Significant part of our economy, and definitely has a say in what happens here. So it's like I was told by, and actually it was a planning commission member, current planning commission member, that actually told me, I don't know why I should be concerned about the retailers having to make more money. It's not my problem that they can't make more money. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you missed the point. He misses the point. He misses the point because without the amount of revenue that comes through this town and comes through, for example, comes through Diane and Anthony's doors, and comes through the hospital and that's not money as much, but help for the people. All of a sudden, that particular sector of this community is going to suffer. Now you say, well, this particular planning commission member says, well, I never go downtown. I don't care what happens downtown. Now this is, I swear to God, this is honest God's truth. This was a conversation I've had within the last month. And I said, but don't you understand, this particular person doesn't live within the town. So they feel like there's some kind of immunity as to what's happening here. What this individual doesn't understand is what is happening in terms of the services they get through the hospital. The person says, well, I don't have any kids in schools, so why should I care about the schools? Well, wait a minute, it's the people in the schools that have, those kids in schools have parents, that those are the parents that are hooking up the sewer lines, they're hooking up the water lines, they're making sure that your dish network works. They're the people that are making sure that the functions of this town function, all the way down to actually what this town looks like when you drive through, if you drive through in the summertime. And that's just even the flowers that are here. We wouldn't have that without a strong economic viability. And that viability is truly threatened by not having an adequate workforce. We can't have an adequate workforce unless we create density. And in order to create density, we got to increase height. Ladies and gentlemen, all this time and effort that Rita has put in the last, how many years with the Housing Authority? 15 years of Housing Authority, might as well just tell it go away. That housing study, we might as well not even look at it again unless this community, and I'm talking about the retired people as well as all of us that are in this business community, actually sit back and say, we are going to address this honest to God, true problem that we have. And until that happens, until that commitment is made, all these studies mean nothing. And we should just quit wasting our time. Thank you.
I want to thank our panel members for offering a variety of perspectives on the development code changes. And I thought we would allow plenty of time for questions here. So if anyone has a question for that panel to start with, let's start with that, and then we'll throw it up. People can ask a question of whoever they like. So do we have any questions out here in the audience? Alice has a question.
I was wondering if there's also going to be like an amendment of the code or adoption of a code that will address like hostels and dormitories, where in other places like New York and actually the Colorado Code for hostels allows 44 square feet per person, per bed.
We don't,
That would help.
we don't have a specific amendment listed in that 8 or 9 page memo, but I agree with you. It's a niche that we should pay attention to. It is
I think
something
that it
I've
would,
got on my longer list.
that would definitely offer incentive to a lot of the property owners up here and locals that might want to invest in having something for the international workers that come. And that way they don't take the long-term housing for the people that want to stay longer. And also, about 5 years ago, there was a stop to their short-term leases in Estes Park. And that also has been a problem for our international workers.
Thank you, Alice. And Alice didn't mention that she works with placement of J-1 visas, so I'm sure she can affirm that if you don't provide housing, the Department of State is not going to provide visas. Is that pretty much?
There's a lot of rules that the State Department puts out there for J-1 visa students and what kind of housing is okay. For instance, we have the Twin Owls Motel. That has been one that I've been working with every year because it's the only thing that is affordable. Even though those rooms are $1,700 a month, the State Department will not allow students to share beds. So you cannot have one person in each one of those queen-size beds. So what we've been doing is we've been taking those queen-size beds out and putting bunk beds in there. 4 people can afford it, but 2 people can't.
Question from Frank.
It's more of a statement, but one of the things some people don't know is we also did a code change a while back that allowed businesses to have space to provide seasonal housing, can also supply seasonal housing for people other than work in their business. It used to be you could only do it if you worked there. And there's one that's opening up this week out, I think, at National Park Village. And the idea was more of a dorm type situation with a communal living area where they just can rent a room, share a kitchen, share a communal open space with a television and get people in rooms with much smaller square footage, more like what you're talking about. And that was a code change was made last year sometime as well. Because sometimes there are businesses like out there, out near the other side, they have the space, but maybe some of the neighboring businesses don't. And that allowed businesses to get together and provide that kind of housing. So there's little things like that. I think like Randy said, there's no magic bullet, but it's little things like that that can start adding to that and having people start working together to provide that kind of housing for the different demographics and people that work here. I'm looking forward to that. I was actually going to see an opening of that this week, I think.
I think that opening is Wednesday at 4 o'clock. They're having a kind of an open house. So I'm sure employers are welcome to go and see if they want to take advantage of that. I think I have a question from Jim, and then I have a question from Ward, and I'll walk over to the other side of the room.
John, when I talk about workforce housing and the needs in the community, which is, I do it with increasing fervor, one of the pushbacks I get is that the forces of the marketplace, supply and demand, will ultimately resolve the problem without any artificial intervention. Can you and your panelists talk about the fallacies of that particular argument?
Yeah, I'd like to address that, the fallacies of the marketplace. If that was true, and again, this particular planning commission member, this came up, and I said, well, if that's true, why have we just got a report that said we're going to be 1,700, 1,800 people short in 2020, and we've not been able to keep up with the demand up to this point in time. The reason that the marketplace has not been able to fix the problem is because there are these artificial stops that don't allow the market to act. If the stops are pulled out, just like Seth is saying and like Rita has said, the phone will begin to ring because now it makes sense. So you have 2 choices, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to have workforce housing, you're either going to subsidize it, which means that you're gonna get into your checkbooks and you're gonna write out a subsidy, or you're gonna remove those artificial blocks and let the market take over. It's the market, it isn't, if that was true, we would not have a problem today. It's a false
I
narrative.
think that's a great point, Greg, and I guess I had raised this question with someone the other day, and my perspective on it was that once you get into the realm of having zoning and building codes and development codes, you have a regulated situation, and roughly 1.5% of the land in the Estes Valley is zoned for multifamily residential, and there's something like another 0.3 or 0.4% that's zoned for duplexes. So we've already made the decision that over 98% of our land is not intended to be used for multifamily residential. And yeah, that's a bigger question. The question was, when will that be changed? Well, I think that's part of what we need to look at is as part of comprehensive planning and downtown planning. The development code was designed in the 1990s, and land use has really changed. There's a lot more mixed-use development. So one of the concepts for downtown planning is to really look at how do you encourage third-floor apartments for workforce housing. So I'm going to wander back because I saw Ward.
While you're wondering, I'll add one more point since I was here. The code now, or up until this change, both the change that Frank mentioned and the density bonus, there were, quote, incentives for employee and affordable housing that were put in the code in 2000. And for both of those incentives, they were used a grand total in 17 years of once. They weren't incentives.
I'd like to just make a comment, as Frank did. It's really not a question, but something I think needs to be thought about. This discussion we've been having, I think, has had a flavor toward, I'm not sure it's toward all attainable housing. I think there's 2 points that need to be noted. We lose professionals from our community on a regular basis. We lose policemen, we can't get firemen, we lose teachers, we lose nurses, we lose doctors. It's not just low-income housing that we're talking about at all. We're talking about sustainable housing for a complete and viable community. And all of these steps that have been discussed tonight are to promote just that, not just low-income housing. And I think that John just started to touch on the other point that I wanted to make, and that was about the downtown, and I don't like to call it plan, the downtown vision, because it is a visionary process. It's not an actual plan that will be put down on paper. They may have suggestions, but it's not going to be a written in stone plan. But that plan is studying, as John said, land uses, and many of us tend to think, both in terms of government and as constituents, of the kind of housing that we looked for when we were young and in the workforce. That's not what people are looking for now. They're looking for urban centers. They're looking for areas where they can walk to. They're not looking for that big lawn to mow. So things have changed, and I think our downtown plan, our downtown visionary committee is working on those kinds of things so that we can plan for the future and what Estes Park is going to look like. It's not going to look the same, and we certainly have to be aware of a complete and vibrant community for our future. Otherwise, we're going to be just like any old retirement community anywhere in the United States with just to have a nice view.
Any other questions here? Elizabeth?
Hi, Elizabeth with Visit Estes Park. Thanks for your time investing in this discussion. I understand the limited opportunity with the height limits and the density and even the incentives, which apparently some are even taking advantage of, as Steve just shared. So has there been discussion, knowing we have limited land in the Estes Valley is where I'm coming from, period, right? Regardless of all these incentives, has there been discussion to create a fee based on any new home build that is not attainable? For example, a developer or a builder or someone coming in to retire and build a new home. in many communities, they pay a higher fee, as much as 33% higher, because they're building in an area with limited space in a destination that does not have space for the luxury of what I just described. So they pay a higher fee if they choose to be here, as opposed to someone coming in to build attainable housing. And then it's not so much about the incentive discussion at that point. We need to start attracting people aside from incentives that are willing to build here and start balancing the pendulum, right, to people that may be coming here to settle, which I've been defending that group 99% of the time, so it's a little unusual for me to even hear myself share this, but I think you know where I'm going there. Has there been discussion in this area?
Actually, Elizabeth, I'd like to address that, because I had the opportunity to work within that kind of a market down in Longmont for about 12 to 15 years. I was there when they first instilled their affordability index, and I'll be real honest with you, all of that is for naught if you don't take care of these impediments that we have right now, and that's height, density, and there are other issues that will hopefully Randy will address, and the planning, the development code committee of the EDC, I know will address it, and it has to do with setbacks, it has to do with open space requirements, all of those elements has to be done before we start levying a tax on somebody we haven't got a clue where to spend it or to how to spend it. That actually occurred in Longmont to the point where they had all this money and they didn't know what to do with it. Now, I'm sure that's been taken care of in the last 10 years since I have actually been in that market. But up through that 15 years, they had a horrible time trying to figure out even where to place the money. So until we address, I'm telling you, I've worked in this field for decades now. And when I tell you that until these other issues are addressed that has to do with density and with height, all of the rest is for naught. There is one other exception that has to be addressed. And this is the little ugly thing that is out in the ethers. It's kind of like that little dirty story, that family story that nobody else wants to talk about. We have to make a decision as a group, as a community, that we actually want workforce people living here. Now you're going to say, well, wait a minute, Greg, that's crazy. I am telling you, absolute fact, that there is a sentiment out there that those kinds of people don't need to live here. And I'm telling you, that comes really even before we start talking about height and density and everything. That we want workforce housing people in this community. It's absolutely critical.
So I think Elizabeth raised a really good point about paying for it. My understanding is that ski resort communities had a couple different ways they pay for it. One, some communities have what's called a real estate transfer tax, but the Colorado Constitution was amended to prohibit the collection of a transfer tax to fund affordable housing or workforce housing. So those communities were grandfathered. So the other thing Elizabeth alluded to was the possibility of impact fees. Presumably that's something we could think about. And the other thing that some of the resort communities do is they engage in a process called land banking, where the municipality will buy land in anticipation of using that land as a part of a future project. And they generally, I think, are trying to pay for that with impact fees. So thank you for that question.
Can I make one more comment?
Sure. So Randy's going to weigh in here.
So we've talked a lot about the services and the products and so on. But one of the things when we talk about impact is the amount of money that goes out of this community with those commuters. And for example, at the hospital, with 29% of those employees that are commuting, that represents a little over $6 million in annual salaries. And then there are a variety of different thoughts around multiplier effects on that, but even if you look at just those dollars, there's a little over $6 million that leaves this community. Those are people that are earning salaries paid here, but they're not contributing to the property tax base and so on. Not because they don't want to, but because they don't live here. And so I think that's another huge impact, that's just one employer. You multiply that by everybody else. There are millions and millions of dollars that are leaving this community because people can't live here.
Another comment from Anthony.
There's that old adage about climbing the ladder. Before all of us were professionals, business owners, retired, whatever you may have done, we were all workforce workers, weren't we? Where did we live? We lived in the lowest cost housing we could find. And that needs to exist in every community. I come here from New York. In 6 years, my house value went up by 100%. Part of the reason I moved here was that my children couldn't live where I lived. As my daughters grew, they couldn't even afford a basement apartment in someone's dank basement. That's how expensive it was. And unless we actually set aside a piece of it, and I'm sure it's in the code somewhere that you can build in this 1.5% you guys are talking about, does 1.5% actually give us enough room for the people that we need? So in addition to not stepping on the people climbing the ladder trying to be who you are today, we need to make room for them. And that's what I have to say.
Kate, I think, has another question.
It's actually a comment in that, Randy, you mentioned, that you've had turnover in your planning department. I'm very aware of that. And, we have turnover in our community departments that try to develop these codes, in part because people can't live here to take the jobs in the planning department. So we are stuck. We are so stuck right now because we can't even get more high-quality people to work in these jobs at the hospital, our teachers, and the planning department, which they got a lot of work to do if we're going to go forward with this housing issue. It's just a comment.
We have a question from Kent, or a comment.
Well, first of all, I had some of the same comments from someone that Greg was having about, we don't have to worry about it. And my answer always is, if you want to turn your lights on, turn the water on, we have to have people here. And certainly, Bob and I have talked about the fact that if it's only just us left, you don't want us showing up, put out your fire. It's not going to happen at our age. Anyway, I've had a lot of discussions, as some of you know, some of the people I've talked to who are developers, and they will come to develop if we can make it easier and if we can take care of this density and height issue. There are some waiting in the wings to actually do that, and they've identified properties that can be redeveloped. So my big issue is to really talk seriously about changing the code, getting out of their way, and also looking at deed restrictions on the land once we have it put together so that it stays as attainable housing.
Thanks, Kent. Do we have any other questions here in the audience? I definitely wanted to take a few minutes to acknowledge some folks. First of all, let's give a round of applause to Adam Shake for helping put together the event, as well as of all of our panel members. Thank you for yourselves too, because there are a lot of you. And I have a number of board members in the audience. If you could hold your hands up. I see my board chair, Jim Pickering, Frank Lancaster, and Kent Smith are on our board, as well as Bob Holcomb, one of our town trustees. We have a number of town trustees and the mayor in the audience. If you could raise your hands. We have Mayor Yersa, we have Patrick, we have Bob, we have Ward. I appreciate all of you coming tonight. I see a number of people here who are active in the real estate industry, members of the Board of Realtors. If you could hold your hands up. We have several folks in the back. Come on, Heidi, you can. You're active in the real estate community. Appreciate all your participation. We have a number of folks from Partners for Commerce. I know Kirby Hazelton had to leave early. Charlie and some of those folks, as well as some folks from the Lodging Association, and just general members of the community. I think Greg highlighted the fact that retirement is actually one of our biggest industries, and a lot of what this goes to is finding ways to serve our entire community, and if we have a balanced community, we benefit. I also want to thank Elizabeth from Visit Estes Park for being here, because obviously they play a big role with a lot of our employers. So I don't know if we have any concluding questions, any burning comments from our panel, but we really appreciate each and every one of you participating. I hope this was informative. I hope it gave you some things to think about in terms of linking the problem to some of the proposed solutions. I think a lot of times as a community, we get into trouble because the solution isn't in the context of addressing a specific problem. We really wanted to make certain that members of our community understand that this is, in fact, a solution aimed at a very big and real problem. We didn't get any email questions, but if you have any questions you'd like to pose to us, any comments, please feel free to email us at info@estesparkedc.com. If you go to the website, estesparkedc.com, you will find copies or links to the housing needs assessment. You can also sign up for our newsletter there. I know the housing and needs assessment can also be found on the website for the Estes Park Housing Authority, as well as the town of Estes Park, and there's a lot of really good and detailed information there. We do have people interested in workforce housing who are going to that as a resource, and certainly that's a good place to start if you have interest in helping address the problem, either as a developer or as an employer, in terms of understanding what the need is. So thanks again, appreciate it. And with that, I think we'll close the meeting. We'll just have a few minutes to clear out, and thanks again for coming.